Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Digging up the body of the rotting Queen of England, Catherine of Valois. In 1437, a Queen of England died. French through birth and the daughter of the French king, Catherine married into the English monarchy and became one of England's most beloved queens of the time. She married King Henry V, but it's through her second marriage to Owen Tudor that she became known in history, and her reputation dwindled a little. Her son, King Henry VI's crown hung in the balance, but this is not the saddest part about this story. Catherine died in the year 1437, but it took nearly 400 years for her to find peace. The treatment in which she received after death was nothing short of a disgrace. The grandmother of the Tudor dynasty, as she became known, had been plagued by an illness for some time, it's believed. 3 days before she died, she wrote her will, and it was clear the once Queen of England knew that death was coming for her. Through her second marriage to Owen Tudor, Catherine gave birth to a boy, Edmund, and Edmund was the father of King Henry VII. Henry beat Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, ending the Wars of the Roses, and it was Catherine who then, being Henry's grandmother, ultimately set the ball rolling for the next 118 years, and the Tudor era begun. Now, when Catherine died, her body was embalmed and filled with herbs and spices, and was then wrapped in thick layers of cerecloth before her body was encased in lead and was placed in a wooden coffin. It's believed that Catherine's organs were buried elsewhere, but on top of her coffin was a funeral effigy carved from wood and dressed in her clothes. The coffin was covered in cloth of gold, and she was then laid to rest, to begin with, in a tomb in Westminster Abbey, close to Henry V, her first husband. There had been rumours that she was buried in the Old Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey, but sadly this was not the case. Now you see, Catherine's son from her first marriage, Henry VI, wanted his mother's tomb to be magnificent. He wanted her memorial to be bigger, to be better. But Henry didn't get around to do this as he died, and then the Lady Chapel was dug up and demolished to make way for a new chapel during the reign of Henry VII. In this process, Catherine's tomb was destroyed and her body was dug up. Her wooden coffin was found to be falling apart and decaying. She was removed from this rotting coffin and placed into a wooden chest with a new flat leaden sheet placed on top. This chest was then placed in front of the tomb of Henry V, a place in which it stayed for the better part of 300 years. Sadly, however, the duration in which the coffin remained out in the open isn't the worst part. As her body was not buried and remained above ground within the walls of Westminster Abbey, her coffin, or the chest she was left in, was made into a visitor attraction, and as the curious visitors filled the halls, the coffin was opened for a small fee. But it gets worse. Not only did the visitors look at the remains of the now rotting queen, they touched her. One witness, when he pulled back the cerecloth, said, "The bones being firmly united and thinly clothed like flesh, like scrapings of tanned leather." Another said that her remains had no clothing and that she was buried naked in her shroud. Tour guides were making money from exhibiting the remains of the Queen, and then people were even allowed to touch the body of Queen Catherine of Valois. Samuel Pepys wrote that he kissed the corpse of the Queen, which had been dead for around 200 years at the time, and then the mistreatment continued. You see, many people flocked to Westminster Abbey and would go further than just viewing the remains of the 15th century Queen. They would touch her and mistreat her body. As said, the London diarist Samuel Pepys wrote once how he saw Catherine's body following watching Shakespeare's play of Henry VI. He said, "On Shrove Tuesday 1669, I to the Abbey went, and by favour did see the body of Queen Cathrine of Valois, and had the upper part of the body in my hands, and I did kiss her mouth, reflecting upon it, I did kiss a queen. And this my birthday, I 36 years old, and I did kiss a queen. So people would flock to the Abbey to kiss the corpse of the Queen, and this became a tradition. However, further mistreatment of her remains took place, as during the 18th century it was written that it had been torn to pieces by a group of young scholars who amused themselves. When this writer witnessed the body, he said it was a shapeless mass of whitish colour and had been desecrated. You see, people would come to the Abbey over the centuries and pull back the cerecloth showing her face and chest, all the way down to her body. Some tour guides inside the Abbey made money from this, charging visitors a shilling to see her remains, and her body was a very popular tourist attraction. Many believed that she was a scorned lady who was being punished by being unburied, for going against the wishes of her husband the king to give birth to their heir at Windsor. You see, Henry V allegedly had a prophecy that stated a prince born in Windsor would lose all rights to the kingdom, and Henry VI lost all rights to the kingdom during the Wars of the Roses. Because of this, it was said that Catherine's body was left out, as one witness stated, sensibly of her fault in disobeying her husband. It was her own desire and pleasure that her body should never be buried. If so, it is pity but that woman, especially a queen, should her will therein, whose dust doth preach a sermon of duty and morality to all. Catherine's body was inspected, and it was noted that quite a few pieces of her skeleton and remains were missing. It was thought that they were covered in lime, and several parts had been eaten away. The entire front part of her skull had gone, and one on the back was found lying on her pelvis. Many of her backbones were missing as well, as were all of her ribs except one, and 2 of her right arm bones had disappeared. Her clavier had been taken and replaced with a bone from her pelvis. So it seemed that souvenir hunters had raided her body and had taken the remains of the former queen, and her legs were found in perfect condition. These remained protected by 12 layers of cerecloth and were preserved well, with the skin still remaining. It wasn't until 1788, where Catherine was laid to rest for around 100 years. But during the reign of Queen Victoria, the vault that she had been placed in was opened, and people broke through to see if Catherine's body was really inside of the Villiers vault. They found her remains on top of a pile of coffins, and the wooden coffin she was in had yet again rotted. It had stuck to another coffin. They did manage to free it, but when it came into the atmosphere once more, it fell to pieces. It was a striking and impressive scene, which I shall ever remember, and which at the time it was impossible to view without some feeling of emotion. The daylight had quite faded, and we were alone in the darkened abbey. 2 workmen took up the box containing the Queen's remains, and followed Mr. Poole and the clerk of the works. The latter, carrying his hand 1 small lantern to light us, led the way out of St. Nicholas's Chapel to the north side of the Chantry Chapel. Mr. George Scarfe and myself followed. No one else was present, and we seemed unconsciously and silently to fall into a sort of processional order. I remarked to him, "We are attending the Queen's 3rd funeral." Not a word was said as we passed slowly round the ambulatory in the darkness. These are the words spoken by a witness who saw Catherine of Valois' coffin then being carried into Henry V's chapel. It is the latest royal tomb in the Abbey, and, though long delayed, it has been thought that the singular and romantic history of a French princess and an English queen should at length be brought to an honourable end. Requiescat in pace. These are the words placed onto the alabaster tomb of the French princess turned English queen, grandmother to the Tudor dynasty. Her story is horrific. Catherine of Valois was the queen who married Henry V in an attempt to unite the French and English thrones. She produced an heir in Henry VI who, despite ruling a while, was deposed during the Wars of the Roses and was murdered whilst he prayed inside the Tower of London. Her remains throughout the years after her death were treated in a very disrespectful manner, with some people even kissing the lips of the Queen, who had died centuries before. This is shocking, as many of her remains had also been stolen by relic hunters who wanted to possess the bones of the Queen. The story of Catherine of Valois' remains after her death is a disgusting and morbid one, and she was not given the respect she truly deserved. It took 400 years for Catherine to finally be able to rest in true, uninterrupted peace. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.